Ooh, oh, hey, 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 ooh, oh. Ooh, so lying. Hey, hey, what's with you today? If it's a band, then you have to say la, 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 la. I never wanted to be an expert in boys or girls. The publisher said, write a book about boys and girls. I want to write something against no. And I was at a conference at the International Boys School Coalition, speaking at a conference, and I was introduced. This is Dr. Mike Nagel. He's very interested in little boys. Not good. But I'm interested in how boys and girls engage with the world around us. I think what I would love most for people to take away is a greater understanding of what's going on inside their children's heads, whether they be parents or educators, but also how that impacts upon children and their behavior, and what are some key messages in terms of how kids learn and how they engage with the world around them. Because too often we see kids do things, but we don't really understand why they might do them.
From my point of view, this is an incredibly important conversation for us to be having. Beyond neuromyths, it's so critical for us to understand what is the research telling us about the impact of our policies, our programs, and our curriculum on children in classrooms, on young people in early learning centres, on adolescents as they begin to look at what's out there in the world for them as they enter the world of work. As you watch these series of videos, I hope that you get a taste for what's possible by shifting practice in light of neuroscience and what it means for our practical applications.
How many of you have adolescent kids at home? Hang in there. I mentioned the group, so I've got a 16-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son. So you can imagine what a joyous world I'm in. The whole circadian rhythms shift. We'll talk about it later, but I'll highlight this to you right now. What is really fascinating, we know about the human brain, is that on or about 8:30 or 9 o'clock tonight, for most of us as adults, the brain will start releasing melatonin to induce the sleep. Now, when kids hit about 12 to 13 years of age, that whole sleep cycle shifts. So the release of melatonin seems to be happening later, as late as 10:30 or 11. If you have teenagers at home and you say, go to bed, they probably do. And they lie there. Right? They're not ready to go to sleep. Now, a couple other things around that. First of all, we do have evidence to suggest, parents, you need to ensure that your children turn off the technology by about 8:30 or 9. There's a raft of evidence that says the blue rays emitted from laptops and computer stuff actually might delay the release of melatonin even later. Now, here's the flip side to that too. The whole cycle shifts. Okay? So what happens is breakdown of melatonin in adults will happen around 6 a.m., give or take, and a lot of it's dependent upon when the sun rises because it's induced by the sun. For teenagers, that's often not happening until 9:30 or 10, and you know this. How many of you are at schools and you see, or at homes, and you see, wake your kid? How many of you find waking your teenagers up early in the morning a joyous event? One. Liar. But you're at school and they arrive and they look like characters from The Walking Dead, right? And then what's great, it often is if they have things like, it might have English first thing in the morning, and she says, today we're going to do Shakespeare. We know that, in primary schools, it's often a good time to do things like maths and English literacy first thing in the morning. That pattern doesn't hold true in high school or middle school because of that sleep cycle. If you're going to do that, you better make sure you keep them active in doing it. Right, so there's something you can do right away. Is think about what do you want to do with kids in the early stages of the day.
My name is Saurabh Malviya. I teach at Griffith University, Bachelor's of Education. I work in after school care as a manager, and then I'm a doctorate. I'm doing my doctorate in education as well. From today, I realized that the importance of conversation, which we just had with Michael, are really significant. From a professional point of view, I can actually take a few tips home today, which I can implement at work straight away and apply them for better professional standards.
Hi, I'm Nikki Condon. I'm family support worker at Studio Village Community Centre. I do parent education and one-to-one support, specifically supporting parents with skills and strategies for children 2 to 12 and 13 to 17. I think one of the great things that I took away was that young men adolescent boys are busy and they need to be busy, and it's important for them to be busy, and that we need to work with that rather than against it. Not expecting them to be sitting still all the time, and understanding that their brain is putting them in that situation, and also working with young women around their emotions, and that their brain is being impacted and is much more emotional, and that they're very susceptible to the hormones. I feel great and really excited and invigorated to be able to share the word, to spread the news, for people to recognise how important the brain is. And the more we get to understand, and that we're learning all the time about the little things that we do every day that impact our children, and how that shapes their brain and the person that they will be.
Evolutionary neurobiologists believe that males were designed to be alert for things going on, right? And you can see this, if you're in a classroom and the groundsman comes by in a rider mower, you can see the boys, like, they want to know what's going on. If you have sons, you might notice that going to sleep at night can be a little problem because they hear everything, like that. And evolutionary biologists say it's a natural sort of thing, and getting them back there can be really problematic. In 1860 in the UK, the Houghton Commission published a report on education. Not a lot of kids were going to school, saying girls come to learn, boys have to be driven. Now, if in 1860 boys are a problem, in 2002 boys are a problem, who really are the slow learners? Maybe the question is not the boys, but how we engage with them. Testosterone is interesting, and I saw this played out really interesting, I thought, in 2003. I was in Colorado Springs. I was doing some research work at the University of Colorado, and in the afternoon I went to a shopping mall. So I'm sitting there having a cup of coffee on the day, and kids started to arrive. So I'm watching, and these two groups of boys came close to each other, and out of nowhere, one boy from each group took about 3 steps, and they lunged and they chested each other. Wham! Bang! The Canadian in me is now thinking, oh, it's a gang thing, I'm about to die. So I'm hiding behind my coffee. And they did that, and then they walked away. I thought, well, that's interesting. And I watched throughout the afternoon, adolescent boys in Colorado Springs, when they came together, sometimes 1, 2, sometimes en masse, they did that. They were saying hello. Poof! It's like wildebeest. So it went from gang warfare to Discovery Channel in an instant. Bang! Now, of course, interspersed amongst that were the teenage girls coming, hi, how are you? I miss you so much, come to my house, let's get together, I'll see you in a half an hour, right? I thought it's amazing. Now, think about that, because I often wonder, in school context, how many boys are disadvantaged because they typically announce themselves physically. They walk past each other. And school rules are, keep your hands and feet to yourself, right? And they get in trouble for it. And that physicality exists. Fortunately, as we get older, we get more sophisticated. But I will admit that when I first came to Australia some 20 years ago, and I passed an Australian male, and he went, I had to think about that he wasn't looking for his horse. I don't know. Are you aware that by about age 10, sometimes younger, males will start to have 5 to 7 surges of testosterone through their system every day? This will go on for the better part of the rest of our lives. Every day. When we hit about 30, for some reason, it happens predominantly from midnight till 7 a.m. You can work that out. If you're a 10-year-old boy, 9-year-old boy, whatever, and this is happening, guess what? Sitting still is not an easy proposition, right? You're more inclined to be impulsive and what you might be labeled as inattentive because you want to see what's going on. It's not an easy thing to do. Let's talk about emotions. What researchers have found out is the mechanism that allows you to go from your analytical part of your brain to the limbic part of the brain and say, what should we do here? Doesn't seem to come online until between the ages of 23 and 25. We know that adolescent kids are more likely to misinterpret facial cues. They're more likely to see anger when there isn't any. They often process emotional stimuli in the amygdala. Okay? Now the amygdala, I point to my stomach, that's not where your amygdala is. How many of you have had a gut reaction to something? You just feel in your gut something's not right. Well, that's your amygdala lighting up. Okay? The amygdala, what primary responsibilities are a number, but one is to search out whether something is to be feared or not. Okay? And in that previous study, students were using their amygdala, teenagers were using their amygdala to look at an emotion. Sometimes if you shoot a warning glare in their direction, they don't get it. It shouldn't surprise you. And they may overreact quickly. Now I'm going to give you an example. This is from over a decade ago that I found very fascinating. I was invited to a school on the north side of Brisbane, and this is before prep, so it was preschool to year 7, a big school, about 750 kids. Okay? 52% of the school population were female, 48% male. This school's behavior management plan was centered on the works of William Glasser with choice theory, the American psychologist, and Ed Ford, responsible thinking. Now, student support classroom was a demountable building where the windows were covered in brown paper, so you couldn't see outside, and there were cubicles. There's not meant to be any visual stimulation, because the idea was for Andrew to write a plan. When Andrew was ready, he could choose to write a plan to re-engage with the environment, to moderate his behavior, his choice. And you could be there an hour, a day, a week. I think the longest I saw a kid there was about 9 or 10 days. Beautiful little boy. He was about 8 or 9 years of age. He was kind of like a young Sheldon Cooper. He was bright, you know, but not really socially and emotionally mature. And I was in the class when this happened. It was fantastic. I love these things. He's in a class giving this brilliant discussion on frogs. You know, he's had a little poster on frogs and da-da-da. And I don't know what his teacher thinks, she should have known, but she said, look, I think you made a mistake. And he just stood there and said, look, what the do you know about frogs? Bang, he was gone. There's no 3 strikes there, as a immediate fraction. Now, what was interesting in this school was this. From January to August of that school year, 2,800 times a kid walked in that door with a piece of paper. So they had a lot of frequent flyers. 2,400 times it was a boy walked into this place with a piece of paper. Over 75% of the infractions that were in that database had something to do with fidgeting, movement, or some form of aggression. And aggression wasn't a punch in the nose on the oval. It was, what'd you do? I hit him. Well, no, actually you didn't. You said hello. Get the idea? So I said to the teachers, look, boys often have a predisposition to fidget. So if you have a group of boys sitting on a carpet and you say, stop fidgeting, you may as well say, hiccup now. And how often do we disadvantage both boys and girls, I suspect? You know, when they're running outside and they're doing everything at morning tea, and they come in and the teacher says, right, it's time for USSR, unsustained silent reading. Take out your books and calm down, which everybody here knows is teacher code for my lunch hour wasn't long enough. Boys are going to do some interesting things, no question. Now, their logic or lack thereof can be equally compelling. Let's keep that in mind. But you know what? Most boys get through boyhood just fine. Look around you. I'm making a bold assumption here. Look with me, gents. But they seem to be okay. In this school, where 52% of the population were girls, 40% of the girl population were well below the state average in literacy and numeracy. More interesting to me, working with the girls in the school, over 30% of the girls, 1 in 3 roughly, had been bullied throughout the year and nobody saw it. You see, because if girls come into a class and they sit quietly, we assume they're learning. And often they're not, and often they're distraught. But that type of behavior is conducive to traditional classrooms. If you come in and you're a bit restless, you're not learning. And in the federal inquiry into boys, there was a tacit suggestion that said maybe one of the reasons why boys aren't doing so well is because we spent too much time and energy on girls. Right? And I think that's a terrible thing. And from that report, I don't know if you heard it, $33 million was dedicated to a program called Success for Boys, where schools could tender for that money to enhance the educational outcome of boys. And I'd argue if you're going to spend $33 million on boys, you should also spend $33 million on girls and not assume that they are doing well. Because I'd hate to see another report come out in a year's time, girls getting it right. And we switch this pendulum. Because maybe the problem lies in what we assume goes on. Now, oxytocin is incredibly important. Oxytocin levels are elevated in women when the estrogen levels elevated. And when women go into labor, oxytocin shoots through the roof because it's about bonding. It's about bonding with the child, and also it promotes lactation. I can go to any school, particularly, high school, middle school. I can tell you when girls' estrogen levels are high because you can see the behavior. It's like, hi, how are you? I miss you so much. Hug me, hug me, hug me. Let's get together. I miss you. Girls do a lot of hugging at school. Did you know grammar school tried to ban hugging in their school? Did you hear that? Because they thought they were being inequitable because boys weren't allowed to physically introduce themselves, so they didn't want girls to do it either. And they put rules to that. You would get detention if you hugged. It didn't last long because they had a lot of girls in detention, not in class. You just can't stop it once it starts. We have research that tells us that when girls are in relationships that are positive with their friends or whatever, it actually, remember I said estrogen elevates, so too do those other chemicals? Well, we have evidence that tells us that even when estrogen starts to go down in the cycle, those chemicals stay elevated if you're in a positive relationship with your friends. In other words, the social relationships girls have has an impact on very powerful chemicals in the brain. We know this is the case. And when those relationships sour or problematic, it has a detrimental effect on girls. Cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. Both males and females obviously have cortisol. It's much more functionally present in females. Females have higher levels of cortisol than males. What's interesting, and this was found out purely by accident, because we can measure cortisol quite easily. We swab your saliva, add the requisite chemicals. There was a study that was done not all that long ago. We're looking at stress levels in kids. Okay, so kids were arriving at school. They're swabbing their saliva to see if their cortisol levels were elevated. And they would talk to the kids and see what was happening. What they found out purely by accident was really interesting was this. If there was a sibling pair, a boy and a girl at home, and there was some measure of stress at home where the cortisol was elevated with both of them, it only took, if there was about a 20-minute gap from that event to when school started, the girls' cortisol levels returned to normal. For the boys, it took anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half longer. Same event, same context, the girls processed it sooner. And more often than not, too, boys would arrive and they'd have to deal with teachers who are either over-caring and they say, Andrew, tell me how you're feeling. Or, look, I don't know what the problem is. Get your books out. It's time to get started. And boys were pushed to apathy or anger. Now, we know, good teachers know that if boys are stressed, the last thing you want to do is ask them about it. You engage them in some kind of physical, even if it's just walking, so they can unwind. So females, even though you have higher levels of cortisol, seem to process it better and sooner.
So what brought me here today was a desire to gain further knowledge in regards to a developing adolescent mind, especially a boy's one, being that I've only got the one child, and I know that the teenage world can be a little challenging and a little exciting at the same time. So any information you can get in regards to what's going on with them can only help you in supporting them through their teenage years. Okay, I would describe the sessions as very informative, very specific to the teenage age group and adolescent age group, and I would recommend from a parent's perspective that any parent could relate to it and take some form of education and information from the sessions. It was really, really informative and really quite enlightening in regards to what your teenager's going through.
One of the most important things for adolescent kids is structure because it minimizes stress. Okay? And we want to do that. So some keys to combating stress. Sorry, a bit of a Freudian slip. I met Bruce McEwen a few years ago in Vancouver. He's a professor at Rockefeller University, one of the world's leading researchers in stress research. And he gave this fantastic presentation on the neurophysiology, the neurobiology of stress. I've tried to share that with you, some of you earlier today. I don't do as good a job. That's not my area of expertise per se. He studies this quite pedantically. And he says, you know, I give these presentations and I say to people, it's really easy to combat stress. So people like to listen to when he talks about stress, and they talk about adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, what it does this, and how can it impact your hippocampus, and how can it do this, and they go, wow. And then when he says, here's what you do, they kind of glaze over, no, it can't be that easy. First of all, you have to eat well. You have to eat well. Increasingly, young people aren't. Second, you have to sleep. Third, you have to exercise. Those three things are critical to eliminating stress. Right? 30 to 40 minutes of moderate activity, eating, and they're interrelated. If you exercise, you typically sleep better. If you eat well, you're more inclined to exercise. Right? They're all interconnected. And it's very simple. And what we're seeing in stress-related research with adolescent kids and kids in general is some of these things are missing. Yes, like I've been involved in education all my life in some way, shape, or form, as a student, as an educator, as an academic. And I've seen a lot of boat patching in my time. Some of you have been in the game longer than I have. You've seen more boat patching. I've seen people say, if you take this thing called national curriculum, we're going to improve PISA results. If we do things called standardized tests, we're going to get better standards. Boat patching. You've had lots of glossy brochures come your way, I'm sure, and say, do this, change educational outcomes. I'd like to suggest to you that you are on the cusp. I've had conversations with people through morning tea and stuff like about this information. Again, this information is starting to transcend schools and environments where people are working with kids. You folks have a fantastic opportunity that previous generations of teachers never had because you have access to information and research about the human brain that previous generations didn't have. I walked into a classroom, I was 22 years old. I finished a Bachelor of Education and a psychology degree with a bunch of 13-year-olds. I wish I had known then what I know now. I might have handled them very differently. I would like to suggest to you that after today, don't stop here. You have access to information. Google it. Find out. Make a case for it. Take the best available evidence into your practice, and I challenge you to go out and build a whole new boat. I think your kids, Your students deserve that, and I thank you very much for your time today. I'd like to thank everyone for taking time to look at this video. I hope you learned something, and I hope you're able to take that away with you and enrich the lives of the children around you.
Whoa, hey, 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 ooh, ooh, so lying. Hey, hey, what's with you today? If it's a bad man, you have to say la 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 la.